Masechet Baba Kama Daf He. The Mishnah mentioned 4 avot melachot, that's one categorization, and then we saw Baraita by Rabbi Oshaya, who listed 13 avot melachot, and we explained how they categorize things differently. And now we're going to see yet a third categorization. Taneh Rabbi Chiya, 24 avot nezikin. Rabbi Chiya enumerates 24 primary categories of damages. And here they are. Tashlumei kefil, tashlumei arba v'chamisha, paying double if one steals something and doesn't admit it, you have to pay double back. Or if you steal an animal, you have to pay 4 or 5 times. Veganav vegazlan, and a ganav is referring to a thief who admits his crime and just pays back the item that he stole. Gazlan, someone who steals openly by force, a mugger. Ve'adim zomemin, if someone swears falsely, such that it would require that the victim to pay $100, and they're found to be conspiring with witnesses, they weren't even there at the time of whatever they said they saw, then they have to pay what they were going to make that victim pay. So they have to pay $100. So that's another type of injury and payment that's required. A man who rapes a woman or seduces her, he has to pay 50 sela. And also mosif shemra, someone who claims that his new wife, did not have dam betulim, but it turns out that he's lying, so he also has to pay. If I go into your tiruma and I make it tameh, so I didn't actually take anything, it's all still there. From, if you just took a picture of it, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But now it was tahor, now it's tameh, and now if you're a kohen, you can't eat it. Or if I mix some tirumah with your regular chulin, or if I take your wine and I pour it as a libation to idolatry. And again, the wine is still there, so you could say, well, I didn't take anything, but now you can't use it, you can't drink it anymore. So I'm responsible to pay for that damage. If you count all those, plus you add the 13 that Rabbi Oshaya mentioned, you get 24 items. And now we ask, Rabbi Oshaya, my tama lo taneh haneh. Rabbi Oshaya, who listed 13 things already, why doesn't he add these 11 more? Right? What does he disagree with? And the answer is, he may very well agree with all the details that one has to pay, but they shouldn't be counted in his counting because b'mamona kamayre, b'knasa la kamayre. Rabbi Oshaya was counting 13 items where one has to pay a monetary restitution. Right? If you, let's say, rob someone at gunpoint violently, that person does not have to pay double. He has to pay back what he stole. So that's simply the damages, the item that he stole. That's not called a fine. So he was not listing anything that's a fine, and those 11 items that Rabbi Chiya added are all fines, right? That's another type of damage, is true, but that was not included in Rabbi Oshaya's list. He wasn't talking about fines. Now, this answer seems fine, but in fact, not all the things on Rabbi Chiya's list are fines. Some of them are really damages, so we're going to ask about that. Ganav v'gazlan demamonahu litne, a ganav, a thief who admits what he stole, or a violent robber, they are both just paying back what they stole. That's not a fine, so they should be in Rabbi Oshaya's list. The answer, Hakatani le shomer chinam v'hashoel. They are already included within shomer chinam and shoel, who, well, they're given something with permission. Here, can you watch this? Or, right, here, you're allowed to borrow this. However, once it's under the possession of the shomer chinam or shoel, then if they are negligent in their care of it, and they take an oath, they said, oh, no, it was not our fault, but they're lying, so basically that's the same as stealing. Even though stealing is different, stealing, you're going and taking something that's not in your possession and doesn't belong to you and taking it into your possession, and these shomer chinam v'hashoel already have in their possession, but still they are lying and basically same as taking something that doesn't belong to them, which they have to then return. So Rabbi Oshaya says, I know I didn't mention ganav and gazlan, and I know that they're not kenas, but I already included a type of ganav and gazlan, which is shomer chinam and shoel. So Rabbi Chia, remember Rabbi Chia included all the 13 things of Rabbi Oshaya, which already includes Sumet Chinam and Shoel. So then that should include already the Ganav and Gazlan. Why is Rabbi Chia mentioning them separately? He would Shoel. He would answer Tana Mamonada Talide Betara Vekatani Mamonada Talide Beisura. He wants to he says you're right, I could, but he prefers to categorize it differently. So on the one hand, he categorized separately items that came to him into his hands in the permitted way. That would be the Shomer Chinam and Shoel. And also, he wanted to enumerate separately that which comes into his hands in a prohibited manner, and that will be the Ganav and Gazlan. The difference between breaking into your house and stealing a book, or versus borrowing a book and then keeping it and never returning it. Both are thieves, but they are different types, and so everybody would agree on the laws. It's not that Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yashad are disagreeing in the substantive way, but they're just disagreeing in the categorization, right? That doesn't make sense to lump them together or to enumerate them separately. Edim zomin demamonahu litne. Now, edim zomin, that's a payment of restitution, and not a fine, right? I had testimony that would have made you pay $100. I'm found to be a false witness that could not have even been there, so now I have to pay instead of the thing that I would have made you pay. Sabar la Rabbi Akiva damar en meshalamin al pi asman. Rabbi Akiva is actually of the opinion that the payment of edim zomin is a knas. How does he prove that? Let's say I have a case where someone testifies as ed zomem, and then he's found to be guilty. Two other witnesses come and say he was with us in Chicago at that time, and the court says, oh, you are edim zomin. You have to pay what you attempted to collect from that victim. At that point, before the victim goes ahead and actually sues to collect the money, that the edim zomin run away and they go to a different court and they admit to the foreign court that didn't know that they were guilty, and they come and say, listen, we want to admit guilt that we are edim zomin. They, according to Rabbi Akiva, they don't have to pay based on their own admission. Well, when do you not have to pay based on your own admission? When it's a fine. That's part of the definition of a fine. Some of the characteristics of a fine is that it's a fixed amount no matter what. And here's the other one, that it's something that you don't pay if you come and admit it, because the point of a fine is to be a deterrent, so you won't do it again. But if you're admitting it yourself, then you don't have to pay a fine. So Rabbi Akiva considers the payment of edim zomin to be a fine, and that would explain why Rabbi Yoshaya does not include it. Okay, now, if Rabbi Yoshaya is in fact following Rabbi Akiva, he should do so consistently. Litnesh tereg avnei shor, litnesh shor dazek shor, v'litnesh shor dazek adam. Ditnan Rabbi Akiva omer, aftam shechavar b'adam meshalem b'motar nezik shalem. If Rabbi Yoshaya does follow Rabbi Akiva, then he should follow Rabbi Akiva for the following case of shor also, and count shor twice. He should count one case of a shor that does damage to another shor, and separately the case of a shor that does damage to a human being. Because we learned in the Mishnah that, according to Rabbi Akiva, even a shor tam that does damage to a human has to pay a full amount of the damage, whereas a shor tam that damages another shor only pays half. Since the laws of the two are different, it should include each one twice. Remember yesterday, Rabbi Oshaya in fact mentioned damages of a human being twice. Once for a human that does damage to property or animals that he only has to pay for damage. And the other one is for a human that does damage to a person who has to pay 5 things. So you see that Rabbi Oshaya does make that distinction. And if he makes a distinction with humans, and he also makes a distinction between two types a distinction between a shor that damages another shor, or a shor that damages a human being, so then they should be counted also. In other words, if you're going to follow Rabbi Akiva, then follow Rabbi Akiva all the way, and add another category for the second type of shor. And the answer is, Hatabre Rabbi Akiva ligzizeh. Actually, Rabbi Akiva already broke the force of that statement that he said. Although it sounds like a sweeping statement here, and the Braita, he tones it down. The Tanya. Rabbi Akiva omer, Yachol af tam shechavar ba'adam yeshalem mina aliyah, Talmud omar ye'aseh lo migufo meshalem ve'eno meshalem mina aliyah. Rabbi Akiva says, do you think I meant that even a shor tam that harms a person Does that mean he has to pay from the best of the land, and he has to pay a full amount no matter what? No, Talmud Amar Ye'aseh lo will be done to him. He only pays from the body of the animal, meaning not more than the amount of the ox that he owns. And he does not have to pay the superior quality. He does not have to pay more than the amount of the ox. And so you see that really Rabbi Akiva is toning it down, and the law of an ox that kills another short tam, that kills another short, or a short tam that kills a human being, is actually pretty similar, and therefore need not be mentioned as two separate categories. Now we ask, these three are can be considered anyway a mammon, that you're paying for this woman who he raped or seduced or said defamed, is now, if next time she's going to get married, she does not have bitulim, and so now she's going to get less, so you can consider that a damages, and that he has to pay for the damages. The first two is 50 zuz, and the last one is 100 zuz. So this is damages for now the lesser amount that they'll be able to get next time. So man nafshach inezek tanale isar tanale iboshet tanale ipegam hainu nezek ma'idach lememar kenasa biknasa la kamaire. So Rabbi Oshaya could answer, listen, I don't know how you want to categorize this payment, but no matter how you categorize it, it's already included in my list. Because Rabbi Oshaya included all types of damages to a human being. So if you're going to call this damages, fine. I already mentioned nezek as one of the things in my category. Is it for pain? I mentioned that also. Is it for embarrassment? I mentioned that also. Is it for degradation, that she's worth less now? So that's the same as nezek. So we already mentioned that. So what else could it be? Oh, it's a fine? Well, I already told you, Rabbi Oshaya says, that I'm not including fines in my list. So either way, either it's a fine and I'm not including it, or it's something else and I already did include it. So that's why Rabbi Oshaya does not include this in his list. Now we further ask, how come Rabbi Oshaya does not include in his list someone who makes someone else's food impure, especially if it's terumah, that would be really bad, or if I mix terumah into your regular cholin, or if I use your wine for yayin nesech. In all these cases, I make them much less valuable, almost unusable, and so I have to pay for that. So isn't that restitution, monetary restitution? These are not fines. So how come you don't list it? Manafshach. Rabbi Oshaya could answer, well, however you want to categorize it, it's already in my list, or I don't have to mention it. How so? If you say that damage that is not noticeable is still called damage, in these cases the damage is not noticeable, right? Before I brought a dead mouse and touched it to your terumah, right? And you won't see a difference between them. It's not noticeable, right? The produce is still there, just as fresh, just as delicious as it was before, except it has a change in its legal status of going from tahor to being tameh. So this is damage that is not noticeable. So one opinion is a machloket about this in Masechet Gitin. One opinion says that's considered damage. Doesn't matter, because now before I could eat it, now the kohen cannot eat it. He can only burn it. So if you say that's nezek, so there you go. I already included nezek in my list, Rabbi Oshaya says. And if you're of the opinion that damage that is not noticeable is not called damage, and so you don't have to pay for it as damages, but you still have to pay for it as a fine, because the rabbis don't want people to go around causing other people's terumah to be tameh. Right? If I get upset at some kohen, I go make his stuff tameh, and I don't have to pay for it. That's not a good thing. So the rabbis imposed a kanas. Well, if it's a kanas, Rabbi Oshaya says, I'm not listing kanas in my list. So that's why either it is already included in my list, or I'm not listing it because it's a kanas. Lema kasaba Rabbi Chia hezek she'eno nikad la shemeh hezek ti shemeh hezek hatana le nezek. Now back to the Rabbi Chia, it seems that he must subscribe to the opinion that damage that is not noticeable is not damage, and that would explain why he listed it in a separate category. He has to say, right, all these because if he thought that it was hezek, then he already mentioned nezek. Remember, Rabbi Oshaya, Rabbi Chia already includes the things of Rabbi Oshaya, and Rabbi Oshaya said nezek, and so it already been included. So therefore, it must be that he thinks it's not nezek, and that's where he has to list it separately. So is that true? Rabbi Chia, we're going to pigeonhole him into being only according to one opinion? And the answer is not necessarily. Tanai zekah de min kera, tanai zekah de la min kera. Maybe Rabbi Chia considers all these things nezek, but he wanted to include separately nezek that is noticeable and nezek that is not noticeable. Right? He likes to have expansive, more particular categories to make sure that you know that all these subcategories are included, and so that's why he wants to list them all separately. Now, we answered all those questions about things that look like they're fines. So now we say, our Tanav, the Tanav Mishnah, that says there are 4 Avot Nezikin. Why do you say that there are 4? Because he wanted to teach you, I think there's only 4, and I do not agree with the listing of Rabbi Oshaya. He said 13. I say no, only 4. Rabbi Oshaya, and Rabbi Oshaya, he made sure to tell you, we can count ourselves. So why do you say that there's 13? Because he wanted to let you know that he disagrees with the enumeration of Rabbi Chia. But why did Rabbi Chia say, I think there is 24 categories? What's that excluding? Right? There's nobody that has a bigger number that he has to exclude. So the answer is Lamutem Osed Fagel. He wanted to exclude these two, an informer, right? If I go and say, I say to the government, this guy did something bad, and then the government comes and takes his property, that would be damages that I cause him as a mosed. Or if I give a korban to a kohen and say, can you please sacrifice this for me? And the kohen makes it pigul by doing one of the services like sprinkling the blood or shechita, having in mind that he's going to eat it after the deadline. That makes it pigul, and that causes me damage because now I paid a lot of money for this animal, and now it's no good, and I have to go bring another one. So he wants saying 24 only, and not including Moser Umefagel. That's why I said 24. Now we ask, wait, these seem like they're good examples of damages. So Vilitne, why not include it and make it 26? Okay, understand Mefagel. We're not talking about damages that regarding consecrated animals. That's a separate category. That's another list. We're talking about regular things. But Moser, an informer, that should be included on this list. And the answer is Shani Mosed Dibura la Kamaire. It's true that if I cause damage to someone by being an informer against them, it's true I would have to pay for that. It is a type of damage, but it's done only by speaking. And Rabbi Chia said, I want to talk about damages as a result of an action, not just by speaking. So that's why I didn't include that. See, every list has some definition of what's included in that list. Hold on, Rabbi Chia. You included Mosi Shemra. That's words. This is the husband that comes and says, I didn't find Bitulim with my bride. So isn't that words? And yet you included it. And the answer is Dibura Deit Be Ma'asehu. It's true, it is speech, but it includes action as well. It has to be that they got married and consummated their marriage, and after he consummated his marriage, then he says, I didn't find Bitulim. So it's a double, 2-step process. It includes having relations and then speaking. So that's why it belongs here. Hold on, these false witnesses, all they did was come to court and speak. Right? And they said, we saw this guy do a crime and he owes $100, and turns out they are dedim zomimin. So they didn't do anything, they only spoke, and yet it's included in the Bichia's list. And the answer is, Hatam afagav delet b'maaseh rachmana kariya maaseh dichtiv v'asitem lo kasher zamam la'asot le'achiv. It's true, even though they didn't actually do anything, the Torah considers it as if they did an action. As the Pasuk says, do to them as they tried to do to someone else. Tried to do, well, they only spoke, but by speaking, they tried to cause this damage to someone else. and therefore they have to pay. So he's going to put it on the list, even though they only spoke because the Torah talks about Edim Zomin as an action. Next question about Rabbi Chia. We understand according to our Tana of our Mishnah, why does it say these are for avot? So that we can infer, each of the avot have toladot, have subcategories. But according to both, is a question both to the Rabbi Chia, what 24 categories, and Rabbi Oshaya that had 13 categories. If it says avot, primary categories, can we infer that there are subcategories for each? What are the subcategories for each of the things that he said? I mean, their categories are so particular that we're going to be really hard-pressed to find subcategories for each of them. Amar Rabbi Abu, Kulan ke'avot l'shalem mimetav. Rabbi Abu says, no, when they called them avot, it wasn't so that we can go think about and find all the subcategories. These don't all have toladot. Rather, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya called these avot to teach us that in each of these cases, one has to pay from the best quality land. If one decides not to pay cash but to pay land, he has to pay in full with the best quality, and that's why they called avot, to teach me that they all have they all share that same requirement. Now, my tama, what's the derivation? How do you know that in all these cases you would have to pay from the best quality land? Acha tachat netina yeshalem kesef, because the Pesukim that tell us about the for avot up there use the following terminology. It uses tachat and netina when in the Pesukim that are talking about an ox that gores or that kills a slave. It uses the word yeshalem when it refers to an ox that damages by eating and trampling, and uses kesef regarding damage caused by someone's pit. Now one of these four words are each mentioned in every one of the 24 categories of Rabbi Chia. And so since anytime that we make a gezerah shava, and you can pick any of these words, anytime any of these words comes up, and it means that you have to pay the same amount in place of, or giving payment, or paying, or money, since in the original context, in one context, this means paying from meta, from the best quality land, so to everywhere it appears in all 24 cases, it means paying from the best quality land. We now go back to the Mishnah and mention the next phrase, Lo hareh hashor kareh ha-mav'eh. The Mishnah says that the characteristics of shor are not the same as mav'eh. Now, my kamad, what does this mean? Amar Rav Zevid mishmed Rav Achi kamad, Chtov lecha min hada v'teteh ida mineh. The Mishnah is wondering, why couldn't the Torah have just said shor, or just said mav'eh, and I would have known, you have to pay damages for shor? Oh, fine, now I know you have to pay for mav'eh also. Or the other way around, why couldn't I learn one of them from the other? Hadar Amar, Hada mechada la'atya. And they said, no, each one has a different characteristic that the other one doesn't have. As we discussed before, it depends who we're going to follow, Rav and Shemuel. So short, is that keren, is that, or other things? Maveh, is that an animal eating, or is it talking about Adam? Whatever it is, they have different characteristics, and one cannot learn one from each other. Now the Mishnah continues and says, "Velo zeh vezeh sheyesh behem ruach chayim." These two, whatever they are both living beings, either both referring to two actions of an animal or an animal and a human being. So these are live beings, and that's not the same as fire, which is not alive. Maika Amar, what is the point of the Mishnah in this line? The Mishnah is wondering, why couldn't the Torah say two of them, let's say shor and mav'eh, and then I could figure out the others from those two, right? Mahasad, even though they have different characteristics, and I couldn't learn one from each other, but if Torah told me two of them, then the distinctive qualities of each would cancel each other out, and I would learn that other types of damage also one is liable, and I could learn all the rest from these two. Hadar Amar, Hada mitarte la'ateh, and then the Mishnah continues and says, no, I couldn't do that either, because both of those have a distinctive characteristic in that they are alive, and that's not true for fire that is not alive. And then continues and says, right, also you cannot learn to bor because those three move and bor doesn't move, so that's why they're all different. Amar Rava, kuluhu ki shadit bor benayu, acha kulu b'mahasad. Levar mikeren, mishum de'igal mifrach, ma lekuluhu sheken muadin metechilatan. If you notice, the Mishnah put bor at the end, and if I was noticing that, right, because the structure of the Mishnah is that if I only had the first two, I would wouldn't know the third. If I only had those three, I wouldn't know bod. So now Rava says, listen, if you have bod by itself, you won't be able to learn from that to all others, because bod has a distinctive quality. But if you take bod and match it up with any one of the others, those two together, you'd be able to learn the other two. And that's true if you match up bod with esh, or if you match up bod with mav'eh, that would be true, except if you match up bod with keren. And that, if you had bod and keren only, then you can reject it and say, no, wait, keren is very different because all the rest of them are pre-warned. For all the other three, the owner has to pay, even for the first time. You're pre-warned regarding your fire or your bod, and you have to pay that right away. And whereas a shod, goring something, that is considered tam until it does it 3 times, and only then it's mu'ad. So if I only had bod and shod, then I would not be able to learn the other two. But if I had bod and one of the other two, then I would be able to learn from those two the rest. Now, however, according to the opinion that says, wait, keren opposite, you thought keren is lesser liability because it's considered tam. Actually, keren should be considered greater liability than the rest because it has intention to cause damage. So if you say follow that opinion, well then they would agree. If even keren, if you match it up with bod, so even though keren has intention but a bod doesn't have intention, so then they will be able to cancel each other out, and you would be able to learn to all the others. So now that we have this statement of Rava, and we say that it's definitely true for the others, it might even be true for bod and keren, since I could learn all 4 from bod and one of the others, really, I only need the Mishnah, and really what that means is we only need the Torah, right? Each of the 4 things in the Mishnah is just summarizing the fact that these 4 things are already mentioned in the Torah. So now that we know that we could make this kind of mematzinu argument, how come the Torah doesn't mention just bod and one other? And then I will be able to learn the rest. Why bother mentioning all of them? And the answer is lehilchotehen, for each of their unique halachot. Keren lechalek ben tama lemu'edet. I want the Torah to tell you about keren because that's to tell you that when an ox gores, the first 3 times is tam and pays half. Only on the 4th time it pays the whole amount. That's not true for the others, so it has to say that. Shen veregel lefotran b'shut harabim. Shen anegel, the owner is not liable in the public domain. If it tramples something, if you leave your hat box in the middle of the public domain and my animal comes and steps on it or chews on it, that's not, or eats it, then that's not my problem. You left it in the public domain. I'm only liable to those in private domain. Whereas the other things, right, if it gores you, even in public domain, I am liable. Bod liftoret bo takelim. Bod is different because that applies to animals. Let's say I dig a pit and your animal falls in, and also its saddle falls in and gets damaged. I'm only liable to for the animal and not for the saddle. So that's different from the other things that it would be liable no matter what. Would it be Yehuda demechayev al niskei kelim bebod? Wait a second. There is an opinion of Yehuda that says that if my pit causes you damage to your vessels, I still have to pay. Liftobo adam, I don't have to pay for a person. This is curious. This goes against all the cartoons that the guy falls into the manhole. But this actually does not happen in reality. Most of the time, people look where they're going. And so therefore, if I dig a pit and a person falls in, I'm not liable. Why weren't you watching where you were going? You didn't see that there's a giant pit right there? But other animals and items are not watching where they're going, and so I am liable for others. So that's why I has to mention the law of bod, because it's distinctive in that it does not apply to damages to a person, according to the Biyudah. Adam lechayevo barba devarim, and has to mention damages of a person, because if a person damages, then he has to pay. A person damages another person, he has to pay 4 different items, including the damage, as we mentioned earlier. Esh liftor bo et tamun. The Mishnah and the Torah also has to mention the damages by fire, because because I'm patur on that which is hidden. If there's a big pile of hay, and then I put my expensive car under the hay, was hiding it under there. You come and you're angry at me, and you burn down my pile of hay. And so you thought that was just worth a small amount. It's just hay. And lo and behold, you didn't know, but now my expensive car isn't under there. You don't have to pay for my expensive car. You could just say, I burnt down what I saw. So I'm responsible for what I saw. If you hit something underneath, you don't have to pay. So that's distinctive about ish, not true about other types of damage. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that if you cause damage to something that's hidden underneath, by fire, you still do have to pay that tu yemai. So why bother mentioning fire separately? Why couldn't I just derive it from the others? That tu avanav, because fire has another special rule that even if it just scorches someone else's plowed field or singes the stones, even though the item remains intact, but it's just damage to a little bit of damage to the sides, nevertheless you still have to pay for that damage, and that's true of fire. It's a distinctive quality of it. And therefore, even though we can learn the basic laws of damages from board and any other one of the damages, nevertheless the Torah needs to go out of its way to mention all of each and every one of these, because they each have a distinctive halacha. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.